In the quaint town of Santee, California, renowned for its picturesque scenery, a horrifying crime unfolded, casting a dark shadow over the community. On the October 9th, 1980, around 6:30, Rita returned home she shared with Michelle White. There, she discovered the young woman had been brutally murdered inside her own house. The chilling news sent ripples of fear throughout Santee, as unsettling rumors of multiple suspects began to circulate among the residents. However, the ambiguous evidence left the police grappling with doubt, sure if they could ever bring Michelle White's killer to justice. Stepping in Sebent, she was immediately struck with a horrifying tableau that would forever alter the course of her life. In the center of the room lay Michelle, a woman of 20 years, motionless on the floor. Life had cruelly departed from her. A pink bathrobe lay open, revealing the cruel instrument of death, a telephone cord twisted tightly around her neck. Rita recoiled in horror. Abandoning her, she fled to the sanctuary of her neighbors, desperately clinging to the hope that this was nothing more than a twisted nightmare from which she would soon awaken. She needed them to bear witness, to confirm the reality that her eyes refused to accept. A neighbor, driven by a growing unease, rushed into the young women's apartment, confirming Rita's worst fear. Stumbling out in utter shock, he immediately went home to call the police. Sheriff's deputies from San Diego County were dispatched to the scene. Upon entering the house, the officers quickly realized the young woman was indeed dead. Her body was cold to the touch. They secured the area as a crime scene, and even seasoned veterans of the Homicide Division were taken aback by the grim discovery. The crime scene was unlike anything they had encountered before. It was undeniably a murder. The assailant had used items from Michelle's own home as weapons, employing a telephone cord and a wooden block from a game to strangle her. Officers also noted that Michelle's robe was open, suggesting a possible motive. They suspected that rape was the underlying cause of the crime. The position of the girl's body when she was discovered spoke volumes. The evidence found alongside Lika suggested a killer, Michelle, determined to eliminate any possibility of survival for her victim. It's difficult to imagine the brutality of the attack. Many experts consider strangulation an especially cruel act. Death isn't instantaneous. To strangle someone with a phone cord requires close proximity. After the girl's body was sent to the medical examiner, detectives took Michelle's cold weapon. The evidence was carefully secured, ready for its journey to the lab for thorough analysis. Meanwhile, detectives meticulously combed through the victim's apartment, searching for any overlooked clues. Their investigation revealed that Michelle's killer was likely also a robber, as her purse was discovered discarded in the living room, emptied of its contents. The apartment was in disarray, with personal belongings scattered haphazardly. Some items were even found submerged in the toilet on the ground floor. Investigators theorized that Michelle's killer had attempted to dispose of the purse's contents in the toilet, perhaps to eliminate any fingerprints. However, the killer had not taken such precautions elsewhere in the bathroom. A telltale thumbprint was discovered on the medicine cabinet at the rear of the house, potentially providing a crucial lead. Detectives believed the clues held the potential to unlock the mystery surrounding the case. First, the urgent task was to identify the suspect. Intriguingly, certain pieces of evidence suggested that the individual was not a stranger to Michelle. Since investigators observed no forced entry during their examination of the crime scene, indicating the front door had been left unlocked, the detectives were immediately convinced that Michelle knew her assailant. Investigators surmised that Michelle herself had opened the door to her killer. The assumption was that she had thrown on a robe, answered the door, and was then attacked. But who would want to harm 20-year-old Michelle White? That was the question that consumed her loved ones when they received the horrifying news. The investigators hoped that Michelle's inner circle would hold the key to finding her murderer. Suzanne, Michelle's closest friend, learned of the tragedy through a television report. The television flickered with the evening news when a shocking announcement broke through the hum of the day. A young woman, aged 20, had been murdered in Santa. Susanna's breath hitched as the image flashed across the screen. Michelle. Frozen, Susanna couldn't tear her eyes away from the horrifying revelation. Michelle? Dead? A wave of disbelief and nausea washed over her, leaving her paralyzed. They had been inseparable since the tender age of 5, their bond deepening over the years. Even as adulthood beckoned, their friendship remained a constant source of joy and laughter, their lives intricately woven together. Michelle, according to Susanna, was simply amazing, with a penchant for playful pranks. Kind, funny, and fiercely loyal, she was a true gem. Art was her passion. She loved to draw and dreamt of honing her skills at an art school. Michelle had a vision for her future: marriage, children, and a career that sparked her interest. She embraced life with enthusiasm and adventure. Upon turning 18, Michelle ventured out on her own, leaving her childhood home to carve her own path. She moved into an apartment, a place that would soon become her tomb. Susanna told the detectives she couldn't think of anyone who would want to hurt Michelle. Everyone loved her. She was kind and gentle. This left the police baffled, with few leads to pursue. Michelle's family echoed Susanna's sentiments, telling investigators how wonderful she was. They couldn't imagine who could be a suspect. The autopsy report offered a few more details, but did little to solve the mystery. Forensic experts determined the cause of death to be asphyxiation. Michelle suffered a brain hemorrhage and had been sexually assaulted. Seminal fluid was discovered in her body. At the time, DNA analysis was not advanced, and all investigators could do with the biological evidence was basic blood typing. Detectives realized that the only way to advance the investigation was through traditional police work. They tirelessly scoured the area, hoping to find a witness to the murder. They were in luck. During a simple neighborhood inquiry, they found 2 individuals who had heard screams on that fateful night. One young woman recounted how the sound had jolted her awake. The witness explained that she instinctively knew it was either a cry for help or someone caught in the throes of a nightmare, and so she simply drifted back to sleep. The neighbor didn't get up to investigate, but she was certain the clock read approximately 1 a.m. Sadly, despite the disturbance, she didn't feel compelled to call the police. The witness's statement aligned with the evidence found at the crime scene, offering detectives a clearer picture of when the murder occurred. According to her testimony, Michelle had been dead for 17 hours when her body was discovered. Rita, Michelle's neighbor, provided further crucial details. Though she had spent the night at her boyfriend's, what she observed before finding Michelle's body corroborated the police's timeline. Rita told the police that when she arrived home, the newspapers were still lying on the porch, an unusual sight for Michelle. Rita distinctly recalled the porch light being on. She informed the detectives that Michelle made it a habit to switch off the light and retrieve the newspapers every morning. Just before Rita discovered Michelle's body, she noticed another unsettling detail. The door was unlocked. Even when she turned the handle, an odd feeling washed over her. She knew Michelle would never leave the door unsecured. They always locked up before going to bed. Rita then explained to the police the reason behind their caution. Just 1 week before the tragic death of Michelle Ritu, a chilling incident unfolded. A stranger had startled Michelle's friend on the street. As she was about to unlock her front door upon returning home one afternoon, a man suddenly appeared behind her. Understandably frightened, she recounted the unsettling encounter to Michelle. The incident prompted them to heighten their vigilance and take precautions. Sadly, these measures proved insufficient to protect Michelle from the looming danger. Investigators meticulously questioned residents living near the victim's home, hoping someone might have noticed a suspicious individual lurking in the vicinity. Their search for answers seemed to take a promising turn when a man named Teddy stepped forward, offering his assistance. He was more than just an acquaintance. Teddy was Michelle's neighbor and a familiar face. Michelle and Teddy knew each other reasonably well, sharing a casual friendship. He had even hinted at a desire for something more, but their connection remained platonic. Often, he would drop by her place to shoot pool in the garage and pass the time with friendly conversation. Teddy recounted to the police that he had spoken with Michelle the day before her body was discovered. He recalled her mentioning that her boyfriend was planning to visit her later that evening. The investigators were intrigued. Teddy revealed that the couple had only started dating a couple of weeks prior. Furthermore, he claimed to have seen them together just a few hours after their conversation. According to Teddy, Michelle and her boyfriend were playing pool in the garage. As he went to bed, he noticed the garage door was shut tight. Oddly, the boyfriend's car remained parked in front of the house. Teddy informed the police that upon waking up the next morning, he observed something else entirely. The car had vanished without a trace. Police estimated that Michelle had been murdered around 1 in the morning. Teddy, Michelle's boyfriend, claimed he had gone to bed at 11 the previous night and didn't wake up until 8 the next morning. This placed him at Michelle's residence during the probable time of the killing. Immediately, suspicion fell upon him, making him the prime suspect in the investigation. The detective wasted no time locating Teddy and bringing him in for questioning. Surprisingly, he readily agreed to cooperate. Michelle corroborated Teddy's account. He recounted that they had been shooting pool until 9 o'clock in the evening. Afterward, they moved inside, spending the rest of the night watching television. When pressed for the exact time of his departure, Michelle stated he left sometime between 12:30 and 12:45 a.m. before heading home. The officers inquired as to why he chose to leave so late. He mentioned he occasionally spent the night, but work called in the morning. Duty beckoned, and he headed home. His story seemed too polished, too perfect. It was a little too polished to ignore. The police seized upon a detail that resonated with unease. Not long before, she had entrusted him with a key. Michelle claimed he'd locked the door upon leaving, but the door was found ajar. The interval between his departure and the screams people heard was mere minutes. Throughout the interrogation, a palpable guilt seemed to consume Michelle. He was haunted by the thought that his decision to go home had somehow led to Michelle's murder. A palpable distress emanated from him, thick and heavy in the interrogation room. Detectives, however, couldn't quite decipher the source of his anguish. Was it the loss of his girlfriend, or the looming prospect of spending the rest of his days behind bars? Throughout the interrogation, he maintained, with unwavering insistence, that he loved Michelle and would never dream of harming her. Yet, his own statements, coupled with the precise timing of events, cast a long, dark shadow of suspicion upon him. The detectives found it particularly unsettling that he had departed a mere 15 minutes before neighbors reported hearing screams erupting from the apartment. The fingerprints discovered at Michelle's home pointed squarely at her boyfriend. Eager to understand the dynamics of their relationship, the detectives interviewed Michelle's family and friends. Among those was journalist Thomas Arnold, who spoke with Michelle's mother, Louise, on several occasions. Louise maintained that she was unaware of any troubles brewing between Michelle and her daughter. Michelle had always confided in her, sharing her feelings openly, and never hinted at any problems. Because of this, Louise found it difficult to believe that the boyfriend could be responsible for her daughter's death. Her best friend Zoe echoed this sentiment, finding it impossible to reconcile the image of the boyfriend with that of a murderer. Michelle, according to her close friends, never voiced any concerns regarding her safety. She adored her boyfriend, firmly believing he was the one. When detectives requested he undergo a polygraph examination, he readily agreed and passed with flying colors. Moreover, he voluntarily provided a blood sample for analysis and pledged his full cooperation in the investigation to find Misha's killer. Ultimately, the detectives uncovered neither incriminating evidence nor witnesses that could tie him to the murder. It became increasingly clear he simply wasn't the perpetrator. With the Michelle brothers cleared from the suspect list, the police managed to establish a timeline of when and how the murder occurred. Yet, the most crucial question remained unanswered. Who committed the crime? Detectives shifted their focus to Michelle's inner circle, those she knew and trusted. Soon, another acquaintance caught their attention. A young man named Mike, a co-worker from the local supermarket, seemed to be captivated by the attractive woman. The detectives discovered that Michelle's colleague had been pursuing her romantically, quite persistently so. However, Michelle's friends revealed that his feelings were not reciprocated. They believed they were meant to be. As the police delved deeper into Mike's relentless pursuit of Michelle, what initially seemed like courtship took on a far more sinister hue, resembling stalking. Michelle had confided in friends and acquaintances on numerous occasions about the palpable sense of threat she felt emanating from Mike. According to her, he was constantly shadowing her. Detectives also uncovered that Mike had been telling his own circle that he and Michelle were an item, a falsehood that deeply unsettled the young woman. Subsequently, Michelle's boyfriend informed the authorities that just days before her tragic murder, Mike had made it chillingly clear that he would not accept rejection from her. He approached Michelle's boyfriend, confessing his jealousy and declaring his conviction that she belonged with him. He was primed for a showdown. Michelle had made it abundantly clear she wasn't interested, yet he persisted. For the investigators on the case, these accounts immediately propelled Mike to the top of their suspect list, and his subsequent behavior only cemented his position. When they finally reached out to him, he was initially unwilling to cooperate. However, after a call from his mother, Mike reluctantly agreed to speak with the police. But during the interrogation, he was visibly on edge and acted strangely. Mike admitted he had been near Michelle's house the day before her murder. He confessed to traveling to the Santee neighborhood where she resided. "Yes, I drove by," he stated. "I went down the street, but no one was at her house." The question arose, "Why did you come?" His reply was simple, "To see her." A follow-up inquired, "You drove all that way just to see her? Why didn't you call?" "I finished work and was just driving by," he offered casually. Mike vehemently denied any involvement in the murder. However, when the detectives pressed him about his whereabouts and activities during the subsequent 6 hours, a fog seemed to descend upon his memory. Initially, he claimed to have been at his father's house, but as the interrogation wore on, Mike's story began to unravel, shifting and changing with each question. He arrived home much later than initially claimed. He stated he was on a date. Mike recounted going to the beach, meeting a girl, and getting her number. Detectives immediately questioned his change in story. When investigators pressed Mike about his hazy alibi details, he abruptly stopped talking and demanded a lawyer. At that stage of the investigation, detectives considered him a prime suspect. They focused on him, suspecting he may have murdered Michelle. Without concrete evidence tying him to the murder, the investigation began to stall. Everyone felt in their gut that he was the one, but lacking any tangible clues directly linking him to the crime, the police found themselves at a dead end. Despite questioning countless individuals and extensive media coverage, they couldn't gather the proof needed to definitively connect him to Michelle's death. As time wore on, a gnawing fear crept into the detectives' minds that Michelle's murder might forever remain unsolved, a cold case shrouded in mystery. The known facts were frustratingly scarce, leading many to believe the truth would forever be buried. Driven by an unwavering resolve, the investigators believed they had exhausted every lead. However, one tenacious mother refused to let her daughter's case fade into obscurity. For Louise Ides, uncovering the truth behind her daughter's murder became her life's singular purpose, imbuing her existence with renewed meaning. Her relentless pursuit of justice garnered significant media attention. "I miss her dearly," she confessed, "and my greatest fear is to pass away without ever knowing who was responsible for this." She was relentless. Michelle's friend was resolute. Countless hours were spent with friends, blanketing San Diego with flyers and posters, but no leads materialized to solve Michelle's murder. The weight of the unknown was crushing for her family and loved ones. Years passed, and with each one, the absence of progress deepened the sorrow. Hope was fading that justice would ever be served. Nearly 20 years after the tragic murder of Michelle White, the San Diego Sheriff's Department decided to revisit the cold case, running DNA tests on evidence collected during her autopsy. Hope flickered when an unknown male DNA sample was discovered. Detectives swiftly uploaded the profile to a vast database, anticipating a breakthrough. To their initial dismay, no matches appeared. The result was a disheartening setback, but the investigators were far from giving up. Undeterred, they meticulously compared the new genetic evidence against persons of interest in the original investigation, including Michelle's boyfriend and a colleague named Mike. Yet, the investigation hit another dead end. None of the persons matched the DNA. None of their DNAs matched the sample discovered on Michelle's body. Disappointment washed over everyone once more. Detectives were left with a dwindling number of potential suspects, each one having to be crossed off the list. In 2019, a chance conversation sparked investigator Brian Patterson's interest in the cold case. As it turned out, he was a native of Ivory's Santee. Even though Detective Patterson had never met Michelle White, he soon realized he had a personal connection to the case. As he delved into the case files, familiar names jumped out at him, people he knew. Detective Patterson, a man hardened by years on the force, felt a familiar tug of certainty. He was on the precipice. He knew it. The key to unraveling the truth, he believed, lay within the silent language of DNA. Experts whispered that forensic genealogy might be their last hope. Jeffrey Vandersib, a senior analyst at the State Criminal Police, meticulously assessed whether the evidence from the Michelle White case was even suitable for the intricate process. First, he ensured there was enough material, a microscopic battle against degradation and contamination. Then began the daunting task, comparing the unknown sample against the vast, sprawling database of DNA profiles from across the nation, searching for its place in the complex family tree. The initial results flickered with promise, a tantalizing glimmer in the darkness. The analysts were certain they had identified Michelle White's killer's father, Rusty Howard. However, they encountered an unexpected issue. Despite the initial confidence, it turned out Rusty had no known children. This led detectives to a new theory. Rusty had a child no one knew about. That was the complexity of the situation. The investigation, reinvigorated with cutting-edge technology, now relied on old-fashioned police work, and that work became even harder when the detectives realized that simply asking Rusty about his secret son was out of the question. Rusty was gone, but the detectives managed to track down his friends. They painted a picture of him as a charming womanizer, often entangled with married women. A chilling realization dawned on the detectives. Rusty might have fathered several children, kids raised by other men, blissfully unaware of their true parentage. The investigation was long and hard, but eventually they unearthed a potential suspect, a man named John Hogan. Delving into the suspect's past, the detectives uncovered a crucial link. His family hailed from Santee. This revelation sparked renewed interest in the case. Further investigation revealed that a mere 6 months before Michelle's murder, he had taken up residence in her very neighborhood. Even more unsettling, he lived in the same apartment complex as the victim, solidifying a potential connection. The detectives also discovered a record of arrests for petty theft and drug-related offenses. None of these crimes, however, involved acts of violence, and all occurred before California's DNA collection program for criminals was implemented. The detectives were certain they were on the verge of a breakthrough, only to uncover details that threatened to unravel their entire case. According to the documents, John Hogan was serving in the Air Force in Mexico City on the day of Michelle's murder. Investigators immediately questioned whether it was possible for him to travel back, commit the crime, and return without detection. The fate of their investigation hinged on these answers. Detective Patterson retrieved Hogan's military records, and a single fact immediately caught his eye. Hogan's vacation spanned from the 1st to the 10th of October, 1980. Michelle was murdered on the 9th. When detectives confirmed Hogan was on vacation on that day, their doubts vanished. Now they were certain John Hogan was Michelle's killer. However, detectives knew they could never arrest John Patrick Hogan, as their prime suspect had passed away. Police officers typically solve crimes through arrests. In this instance, no arrest would ever be made. Hogan's demise, in a grim twist of fate, seemed to corroborate the investigators' theory. His death, caused by an overdose of illicit substances, occurred precisely 24 years to the day after Michelle Wade's murder. It was an eerie coincidence that sent shivers down their spines. Driven by a need for definitive closure, the detectives pressed on, determined to confirm Hogan's guilt beyond any doubt. Even in death, Hogan held the key. Vital data, crucial for the analysts, had been collected during his autopsy. Preserved after his passing, Hogan's blood samples became accessible to forensic experts who meticulously compared them to the existing DNA evidence from the crime scene. The results were undeniable. Michelle's body bore the indelible mark of John Patrick Hogan's DNA. Investigators surmised that Hogan had already set his sights on Michelle, perhaps even scouting her out while visiting old acquaintances during a military leave. Detectives believe he possessed prior knowledge of Michelle, her appearance, her residence, the rhythms of her life. Hogan observed Michelle's boyfriend departing, seizing the opportune moment to strike. He approached her house, catching the young woman unawares, knocking on the door shortly after her boyfriend's exit. She seemingly threw on a robe, descended the stairs, and opened the door. In all likelihood, Michelle mistakenly believed her boyfriend had returned. Instead of finding solace, she was confronted by a monster. This encounter led to a brutal act of violence as Hogan assaulted and murdered her. With the final piece of the puzzle now in place, the investigators were able to meet with Michelle's family, revealing the identity of her killer and providing them with answers. It was a bittersweet moment. While it brought a sense of closure, it couldn't erase the pain of their daughter's death. Nevertheless, they finally had the answers they sought, no longer burdened by the agonizing question of who was responsible. Detective Patterson felt a profound sense of gratitude to everyone who aided him in bringing closure to the White family. He was especially thankful to the relatives of John Hogan, who stood to gain nothing but potentially lose a great deal. The Hogan family members were instrumental in the detectives' investigation. While they undoubtedly hoped that the perpetrator wasn't their own kin, they were prepared to do what was right. Patterson found it deeply touching that they offered their assistance despite the possibility that their relative might be a criminal. The case simply could not have been solved without their willingness to cooperate. For Louise and Michelle's mother, the resolution offered a starting point on the long road to healing, though she would likely never fully recover from her devastating loss. In Michelle's memory, she and her best friend, Suzanne, dedicate their time to volunteering at a crisis center. There they offer support and a helping hand to women navigating the difficult aftermath of sexual assault.